early societies in the Americas and Oceania. And if you're wondering, early societies, so this is like the rise of societies, organized societies, whether they were literate with cities or not. What do the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, where I think all of you are sitting right now, and Oceania, where probably none of you who is watching is sitting right now, sort of like in Australia, the South Pacific, Hawaii, for example. What do they have in common? Well, nothing. During the early era, right? Early era of societies, there's no connection. Maybe their trajectories are a bit similar, okay? Maybe the way humans organize themselves, but there's no connection. Your authors put these two topics together in the same chapter to create a chapter. Instead of two really thin chapters, they put them together to have one rather slim chapter. It's just really a matter of convenience for the publisher, okay, to reduce the number of chapters. In fact, in this chapter, you do see the bias of historians or historiography relying upon the written record. So if the Aboriginal people of Australia did not leave us an alphabet, okay, they did leave us cave paintings and kind of silhouettes of their hands and rock paintings. They did not leave us a written record. And epic like the Gilgamesh of coming out of ancient Mesopotamia. Historians have given them less attention. So if we don't have the written primary sources, unfortunately, historians have created fewer secondary sources. So, long story about why this is a rather short chapter. Good news for you is there'll be rather short lectures as a result. Okay? So, settlement of the Americas, 15,000 years ago? Maybe more. You just read an article, I hope you did for the first exam, on even earlier findings or theories of an earlier settlement of humans in the Western Hemisphere, this side of the planet. Certainly we know that early humans arrived from what is now Russian Siberia into what is now Alaska, across a land bridge, during an era when the Earth was very cold and sea levels were low, and you could walk from Russia to Alaska. You can't do that anymore, and the way things are going, it's going to be even it's going to be even further to travel by boat, okay, as oceans level rise due to global warming. Global warming took place thousands of years ago, but very, very slowly. No one would have noticed it over one's lifetime. It was not human-induced. But the Bering Straits did become submerged, or I should say Beringia did become submerged. So the humans who migrated into the Western Hemisphere from Russia, following the big game, this is the gathering and hunting era, could not walk home again. And why would they? Okay, there was really no home. They were migratory people. They wandered into what is now northwestern Canada, down kind of an ice-free corridor into what is now basically the western United States, into Central America and South America, all the way to the tip of Tierra del Fuego by about 10,000 years ago. That's as far south as you can go in the Americas. So gathering and hunting people. Well, as we have seen in some places elsewhere, farming is invented. Likely by women. We don't have the written sources to conclude that, but we do know the crop, and it would be corn, which is a grass, okay, which produced a small, some small beads that were edible. Well, if you have the discipline to plant the large kernels, so to speak, and eat the small ones, even though you're hungry, and do that again and again and again, and multiple generations, you start to, in a sense, invent corn. Okay, so farming is created in the Americas 9,000-10,000 years ago. So there's that slow shift among some, I will now call them Native American people, to the Neolithic era, okay, to the farming era. Not as many animals to be domesticated. That's going to be a problem epidemiologically, okay, for Native peoples prior to 1492. Animals get us sick. We think, this is the current research anyway, that the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, originated in bats, was transmitted through pangolins, which are scaly mammal, who knows, a rare species, and then transmitted to humans. Okay. For native peoples prior to 1492, there were fewer numbers of domesticated animals to get them sick. Awesome. Yes, awesome. Awesome for 14,000 years, but then not awesome when the Europeans bring diseases that they and peoples of Asia and Africa have been struggling with and surviving sometimes over tens of thousands of years. Things like smallpox. Smallpox related to a disease found in cows, cowpox. If you don't have cows, you're not going to get cowpox. You're not going to get kind of this relative to smallpox. If you don't have chickens, less likely to get bird flu, avian flu. If you don't have pigs, you're not going to get swine flu. Native peoples had none of those. Right? So they did not have the acquired immunity to diseases that you might get in early childhood, and then, if you survive, you grow into adulthood, you become a productive member of your society. Okay? So Europeans, Africans, and Asians are going to be living with animals for, if you do a little bit of math here, right? Let's just say 10,000 years, right? And whatever, 9,000 years. What didn't die made them stronger, so to speak, right? What didn't kill you when you were 2 or 3 years old, you grow up and you're not going to get again as virulent. You're going to have some acquired immunity that native peoples will not. So the crop domesticated will be corn, fewer animals domesticated. Dogs, yes, certainly the dogs followed humans into this hemisphere because they were hunting companions. What do we got? Llamas? Turkeys? I should actually pop open the book, but there are not many, right? You're not going to domesticate bison. Woolly mammoths would not be domesticated. They're hunted to extinction anyway. Mastodons hunted to extinction. These large mammals do not survive the last ice age and or were hunted to extinction. So what's going to pull your plow? You don't have cows. You don't have cows to milk. You don't have oxen to pull your plows or horses or donkeys, right? None of that until well after 1492. And along with the same diseases that went along. By 5,000 years ago, there are ceremonial centers, especially in the southern Gulf of Mexico. Few cities. So in these ceremonial centers, they were urban, so to speak, but the priests lived there, and the people would live in the farmland growing corn, and then at some point later on, things like beans. Once you get corn and beans growing together, you have a fully nutritious meal. Corn has no protein, or very little. Okay? Beans have the amino acids you need to create a balanced meal. Right? So carbohydrates from the corn, complex carbohydrates, and the amino acids from the beans, fully balanced meal. So then you can settle down and begin to create societies, right? More advanced societies. As the Olmecs will do in the southern Gulf of Mexico. Someone asked this in an email, what does BCE mean? And I'm like, I don't recall telling you, right? And I guess you can Google it, but essentially before the Common Era. So 1200 BCE, 1200 plus the year we're living in, let's just round it off to 2000, right? 2000 plus 1200, 3200 years ago. So that's before the Common Era, before the year 1. And what is this all based on? Well, it was based upon what some German Christian monks did about, 1400 years ago, right? Put together a calendar based upon the life of Jesus, at least when they thought Jesus was born. Okay, so what used to be BC, before Christ, is now BCE, before the Common Era. What used to be AD, no, not after death. Anno Domini, year of our Lord, which used to be the year 1 and thereafter, is now CE, the Common Era. So I'm standing here in the year 2020 of the Common Era. Okay? And you're watching this wherever you are at the same time, right? Unless, heaven forbid, someone preserves this and in the future someone's watching this. Hi, future, we really screwed up the planet, sorry. We kind of knew what we were doing, but it was really tough to fix the climate, so sorry. I just want to say that to the future, in case the future's watching. Now, I'm not even being facetious, right? We're locked into this zeitgeist, right? We blame people of the past for the ways they live, but in some ways it's really tough to break that zeitgeist, which we could. We can do little things, right? We certainly can do little things like conserve energy and recycling and things like that, but really also put pressure on our lawmakers, on our elected officials, especially at the national level, and the non-elected ones like the Supreme Court, to push for climate legislation. Okay, back to 3200 years ago. Drafted labor would create massive stone heads, the Olmecs we call them, the people there in the southern Gulf of Mexico. See on a map in a moment. They had no writing, no metals. No metals? How did they create these 8-foot tall big heads? Well, they carved them with sharper and stronger rock. No metals in the Americas until after 1492. The Europeans bring metal in, iron, purified iron or steel, copper, bronze, those types of things. the native people would cut with volcanic glass, obsidian. So no writing, no metals, but they did have a rubber ball game. So they did know how to make a rubber ball and kick it around in probably a religious ceremony. By about 2,400 years ago, the ceremonial centers were abandoned. We don't know why, but the Olmecs, who were here in purple, if you follow my cursor, influenced their neighbors to the east in the Yucatan Peninsula and through Central America, the Maya, and later the people of Teotihuacan, in this green zone in what is now Mexico. So this is the region we're talking about. We'll call it Mesoamerica. Mesopotamia was the land between the rivers, Potamia rivers. Here, the land between the Americas, at least North and South America. The Maya will be the successors of the Olmecs. They will take on things like the rubber ball game. By about 2,400 years ago until about 1,000 years ago, now we're in the CE. Okay? They had, about 1,000 years ago, small states through here, Yucatan Peninsula, southern Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras. These cities were often at war with one another, and the goal, we think, was to capture the enemy. Not just to kill the enemy, capture the enemy, kind of imprison the enemy, maybe enslave the enemy, but sometimes sacrifice the enemy to the gods, especially the sun god. Okay? By about 1,000 years ago, the Mayan civilization declined. It doesn't disappear. I've actually been to a number of these Mayan city-states, and the guides walking me around and explaining all this were of Mayan ancestry, right? People running hotels were of Mayan ancestry, right? The Mayan didn't disappear, but their civilization declined. Probably for environmental reasons. Why? One of the prevailing theories is that to create all of these really brick cities, they had to cut down a lot of trees. When you cut down all your trees, it changes the alkalinity of the soil, the chemical composition of the soil. You can't grow enough corn, enough food, and you have to abandon your cities. So keep in mind that if somehow the coronavirus gets worse and farmers can't farm and you can't bring food to the cities, we're pretty much in trouble, right? We'd have to leave the cities, go out and forage in the woods somewhere, although there's not that many woods anymore, right? So this is what people will do. They don't disappear, but the urban centers decline. The Maya did have writing. We only deciphered that writing about 60 years ago. Okay, so here's one of the languages, written languages, that was lost and it's been now recovered. We do see that Mayan society was pyramidal in shape, meaning rulers and priests were at the top. The rulers could commune, they believed, with the gods, often through bloodletting ceremonies. So if you read the first page of your chapter, Jaguar Paw, whatever the king's name is piercing himself and bleeding, especially in very delicate parts of his body, to please the gods. Fertilize the earth. Let the blood nourish the earth so the corn grows and the sun god is pleased. Commoners are next. Enslaved people at the bottom. They had a very elaborate calendrical system, calendars. I've never really much understood it, but kind of like gears in a wheel that align every 52 years. But it worked. And an agricultural people knew and had to know when to plant and when to harvest. They had to manage their calendars. Much more advanced than what the Europeans had 1,000 years ago. Writing, but much was lost. When the Spanish get there, they pretty much destroyed all the writing they could find. So we just have fragmentary remains now that have been put back together. We thankfully do have the creation story called Popol Vuh, about the twin gods who descended the underworld, and it's all cool with snakes and many figures. It was very confusing. I'll be honest, I tried to read it and didn't quite understand it. But reading it on the beach in Cancun was probably part of the problem when I was actually in this part of the world. But there was a lot of bloodletting, and we saw that as well in the ball game.